students, and welcome to today's lesson. I'm Ms. Davis. Today, we will explore the question, how does the environment affect decomposition? Imagine you're an archaeologist at a dig site in the desert. You find something, but you're not quite sure what it is. As you gently brush away debris, you uncover this mummy. As you carefully dig it up, you determine that this mummy was a human male who was buried in a shallow grave in the Egyptian desert about 5,000 years ago. You take some time to observe the mummy. What do you notice? Maybe you notice that it looks like the skin is torn on his forehead and you can see his skull. Perhaps you notice his skin looks dark, stiff, and cracked. I also notice that he is lying in the sand. And do you notice the jar behind him? Do your observations lead to any questions? What do you wonder? Do you wonder why this body didn't decompose? Maybe you wonder whether people did something special to keep this body from decomposing. You might also wonder who this person was. This man, who researchers call Gibelline Man A, is considered to be a natural mummy. People in some cultures mummify dead bodies to preserve them on purpose. But this mummy was preserved by accident. Conditions in the environment preserved his body and prevented decay. Wow, this body has been around for 5,000 years. So, how did he stay so well preserved? Remember our raspberries? They grew mold within just 10 days. And we also know that decomposers break down dead organisms. So, how did this mummy stay so well preserved? Why did the environment where the mummy was found prevent it from decomposing? In this lesson, we will explore the relationship between decomposition and the environment by investigating the question, how does the environment affect decomposition? There are many ways the environment may affect decomposition, but let's just focus on one, the material covering the ground. The mummy was found in the desert, which is a sandy environment. So let's compare sand with another common ground covering, soil. But how can we test whether sand and soil affect decomposition? Well, we saw that the raspberries can decompose. What if we put some raspberries in sand and some other raspberries in soil? Then we can observe the raspberries and look for differences in how they decay in different ground materials. We will fill one container with raspberries and soil, and another container with raspberries and sand. We will then close the jars. What differences do you notice between the two jars? The only variable that differs is the type of ground material in each container. Here are our raspberries on day 0, and here are our raspberries on day 8. What do you notice about the raspberries in the jar with soil? How do they compare with the raspberries in the jar with sand? Wow! Do you see the decomposition in the soil jar? Compare that decomposition with the sand jar. The raspberries in the sand still look like raspberries to me. Their shape hasn't changed much since day 0. But the raspberries in soil look squished. They seem mushy, and they aren't really shaped like raspberries anymore. I think I might see mold growing on the raspberries in the soil too. What might have caused more mold to grow and more decomposition to occur in one system? Well, remember, the only variable that differs between the jars is the ground material. That must have something to do with it. Let's look more closely at the sand and the soil to further investigate how do these materials affect decomposition. Well, we'll start with the soil. This soil is the same type of soil we used in our jar. What do you notice about the soil? Did you notice the rocks and bits of dirt in the soil? Maybe you noticed the small bits of plant tissue, like pieces of root and leaves. Now let's look at the sand more closely. What do you notice about the sand? Maybe you noticed the sand looks like different colored grains of salt or like tiny bits of rocks. Let's compare these two materials. I noticed both soil and sand are made of tiny bits of matter and have rocks in them. But the soil seems different from the sand. The soil has some bits of leaves and roots in it. How do these differences affect the mold growth we saw in the two containers of raspberries? Maybe the differences result from the way each material forms. Sand is formed by weathering and erosion of rock. So what you see in the sand is just rocks. Soil also contains small pieces of weathered rock. However, soil also contains small pieces of dead plant and animal tissue. Maybe you wonder, why does soil contain plant and animal tissue? To answer that, let's talk about how soil forms. A compost pile is a great place to observe soil forming. To build our compost pile, we'll add leaves because we know they will fall to the ground. And we'll add some food remains, too. What else can decompose? Dead animals and even feces can land in our compost pile, too. What will happen to all these materials if we leave them there? Animals such as these worms may also join the pile. The worms eat dead tissues from plants and animals. They break down all those materials, leaves, food waste, dead animals, and even feces. What do you think happens next? Decomposers such as fungi and bacteria break any remaining materials down into even smaller pieces. How does this process explain what we observed about the soil? Well, soil isn't just little pieces of rocks like sand is. In soil, worms and other decomposers break down plant and animal matter, so soil also has been broken down parts of lots of different dead organisms in it. So, which ground material likely contains more decomposers? One of your tasks at the end of this lesson will be to make a claim about which material, soil, or sand, likely contains more decomposers. Remember Gebeling Man A? He was buried in sand. What if he had been buried in soil instead? What might have happened to him then? Let's review your tasks for today. First, record your observation from the investigation. Second, describe what happened in the compost pile. Third, make a claim about the results of the investigation.